All right, so we're going to get started today with exercise 119, which is fundamentally a continuation of what you did in 118, where you're working on the same floor plan. The difference here is that we're going to take the floor plan that you were working on that was just kind of basic lines, and we're going to enhance it such that it looks better. And we're going to add line weights, we're going to add some block references, and we're also going to kind of organize the file as a whole and add some layers and make sure that it's well organized as we move forward. After this, we're going to move into doing elevations, and then we'll end up doing paper space and model space and doing layouts and how do you get final print versions, etc. So everything builds on itself. Next class for exercise 120, I'll spend a lot of time discussing line weights. For our purposes today with line weights, the copy center was supposed to put a copy on the back, and I'm not sure whether I messed up or they messed up, but there's the line weight guide is available on the website right there, and you guys can look at it. Like I said, it was supposed to be on the back of your handout, but it's not. I pulled it up here in Photoshop, so I have a little bit bigger. This is meant to be a guide for you guys as you start to develop your floor plans. I took the basic floor plan that we started with in exercise 117, and I added appropriate line weights and line types to it. So here, for example, if we look at the wall, there we go, there's wall. So a typical wall is going to be at the 0.40 millimeters, and it's going to be black. And I'll explain how you change these settings a little bit later on today. But I wanted to point this out so you can kind of see. This is my general guide for what I feel is about appropriate for line weights. And if you kind of squint at this, you can tell, well, and you're missing some of the details that are not even showing on the projector. But you can tell that the walls jump out more than the doors do, for example, which jump out more than the windows do. So there's a hierarchy that we're looking to establish. So anyway, I'll come back to that a little bit later, but I wanted to point that out and apologize for it not being on the back of the handout. Next handout, it will be on the back for your reference. So I went ahead and I opened up my floor plan from last class. Actually, this is a floor plan that I've worked on before that's a little bit more developed. And it gives me a good place to kind of start. It should look similar to your floor plan. This is in its relatively raw state. There's a few pieces that weren't quite finished that I need to adjust. But it does have its doors and it does have its windows. And likewise, there's a few of these little things that probably need to go away. I'm seeing these as I'm going along, making a few little corrections. So anyway, right now, if I were looking at my drawing, I need to start thinking about how do I organize the file. And sure, could this just be a line drawing, everything on one layer? Yeah, absolutely. But typically, if you're working in an architectural firm or you're trying to organize your files in a little bit more meaningful way, it's nice to have some layers set up. The same way that we have layers set up in Illustrator, the same way we have layers set up in Photoshop, etc. Now, when we start talking about layers in AutoCAD, it's a little bit trickier as a subject as a whole, because depending on which firm you might be working for, they may have a certain layer structure that they adhere to. And so there is a best practices set of layer structures. I'll discuss that today. But depending on where you're working, they may have their own arbitrary set. Or they might tell you, this is how we need to name our layers. And you won't know that until you're actually working for a firm. So you have to be a little bit flexible. For our purposes today, you can name the layers anything you want, because it's only you that's working on a file. The sticky part comes where, let's say you're working on a design file, and then you hand that file to somebody else. And if you don't have some kind of a convention or some kind of an organization, and they start looking at your file and start trying to work on it, they're going to be totally confused as to where all this stuff is. So the common AIA standards for layers, typically if you're working in architecture, your layer would start with an A dash. So if you're doing architectural work, it would be A dash whatever. If you were a civil engineer, you would have drawings that would, or layers that would start with a C dash. Does that make sense? If you were an electrical engineer, you would have drawings that were E dash. So depending on who's working on it, it's pretty easy to see whose layers belong to who. In our sense here, you're the only person working on the file, so do you really need to have an A dash in front of it? No. But I'm telling you that because that's common practice. And so it may be something that you decide to include. It may be something that you decide to forego for right now. But I at least wanted to explain that to you. So right now, if we're looking at AutoCAD here in the home ribbon, in my layers right here, if I click on the big button that's layer properties, when I click on that, it's going to bring up a little floating window here. And inside of this window, we're going to be able to see what layers are currently in my file. There are two layers. One layer is the topography layer. One layer is called layer 0. AutoCAD by default always has a layer 0. You cannot delete layer 0. It's just layer 0, and it will always be there. So right now I have two different layers. And if I start to look at the layers, there's obviously a name. There's a green check mark next to layer 0. That's the current layer. For you guys, your green check mark might be on the topography layer. It might be on layer 0. Maybe it's on a different layer. I don't know. But that's the current layer. So if I was going to draw something, it would show up on the layer with the green check mark on it. I can change which layer is the current layer by just double-clicking, and the green check mark's going to change to a different layer. I'll leave that here for now. Name is self-explanatory. That's what we talked about that a little bit. Then we move over into some of the other little icons here. And you'll notice that everything has been condensed just a little bit. So if I expanded these, we could see that this actually says on. And the next one here says freeze. They're condensed down because we don't really need to see the full text. We can just see the icon. So if I have layer 0 and I have the topography, because layer 0 is my current layer, I'm going to demonstrate using the topography layer for right now. I have two options. The first one here is on or off. And so I can choose to turn the topography off by just clicking on this little light bulb, and the topography is going to disappear. I can choose to turn it back on by clicking that light bulb. The next one over here is called freeze and thaw. And I will explain the difference in just a second. Essentially, if I click on the sun, the same thing happens that the on-off does. And so AutoCAD has this weird holdover because it has on-off and it has freeze and thaw. And back when I was first learning AutoCAD in the 90s, I know that's shocking. That was a long time ago. Some of you were just being born. That's crazy. Computers weren't as powerful as they are today. The truth is, we can do line drawings all day long on these computers, and it's never going to bog down. We can have giant files. It's never going to get slow because it's relatively simple. Back in the old days, it was really hard on the computers to do these kinds of line drawings and to keep really big drawings organized. And so AutoCAD developed, or Autodesk, the makers of AutoCAD, developed a twofold system, an on-off and a freeze-thaw. And what the difference is that on-off just chooses to display or not display something. But that something retains, or it stays in the computer's memory. So you're showing it or you're not showing it, but it stays in the computer's memory. The freeze and thaw option was take this out of the computer, turn it off and take it out of the computer's memory to make the computer run faster. At this point, I'm shocked that AutoCAD still has on-off and freeze because they do the same thing and computers are powerful enough not to worry about it. So you can use either one to turn the layers on and off. Typically, I use freeze and thaw because that was old school. And so I'll probably continue to use it. You can use whatever you want. It's not going to make any difference. But I at least like to explain that difference. Next to the freeze and thaw icon is the lock icon. What this does is if I were to lock the topography layer, it kind of grays out the lines a little bit. And if I were to try to select those lines, that's fine. I can still select them. I can still snap to them. But if I press delete, it would say, nope, I can't delete that object because it's locked. So there's an advantage to locking it. If I tried to select it and then move it, it's not going to let me move it because it's locked. So it's a way of just preserving. I don't want to edit this. I don't want to change it. Let me just lock it and move on. So that's not a bad thing for the topography layer for right now. Next to that is a little printer icon. This allows us to tell the printer, don't print this layer. So if I didn't want the topography to print, or if I had some guides, and we'll do this when we do the elevations, if I had some guides that I didn't want to print, I would turn that layer into a non-printing layer, and when I went to print, it would never show up. So we'll leave that on. Next to it, we have a color. The default color is white. This color changes when we plot, and you've already seen this when you've plotted to your JPEGs. This color automatically changes to black. So white in AutoCAD changes to black when you print. It will also change to black automatically when we move into paper space. So we'll leave that as white for right now. Line type is set as continuous. That just means it's a straight, unbroken line. We can change the line type to have dashes, or to be a center line, or to be a phantom line, or a variety of other line types. We'll discuss that more next class. I'm not going to worry about it for right now. Next, over here, we have something called line weight. The line weight is the thickness of a line. And there's different ways of measuring that thickness. When we were working in Illustrator, it was by points. So we had a 1-point line, etc. In AutoCAD, it's by millimeters, which is it's back to an old school method where you had pens that you were drawing with, and the pen had a certain millimeter tip on it, and that's what you were drawing. So it's in reference to that. And then we'll move on. The rest of these, this is transparency. 0 means it's solid, which is fine. I don't think I've ever, in my 20+ years of using AutoCAD, worried about transparency. So I just leave that the way it is. And then we'll discuss the rest of these a little bit later on. But for right now, we're going to leave it as is. Now, if we wanted to create a new layer, I could click on this icon right here. It's the stack of paper with the little kind of star next to it. If I click on that new layer button, it will create a brand new layer for me. The brand new layer inherits the properties of the layer above it. So sometimes you have to make some edits. See how this one, when I created it, was automatically locked? That's going to be a problem, so I'll make sure it's unlocked. The rest of these are fine, but I'm going to change layer 1 here. I'm going to change the name of this. I'll double click to get into it. Sorry, there it is. And I'm going to do A-wall. And so there's a variety of layers that are typical in architecture, one of which is wall, or walls. The next one would be doors. The next one would be windows. And then from here, it's a little bit dependent on how sophisticated your drawing is going to be. Fixtures, furniture, finishes are all other options. Sometimes it's more specific than that. It just depends on the drawing itself. So I've created a wall. I'll go ahead and press Enter. And if we reference what I was suggesting the thickness of a wall to be, there it is, wall, I was suggesting that it's 0.40 millimeters. So right here on the A wall, I'll come over here, and under line weight, I'm going to change from default. I'll click on it, and you'll see that 0.40 millimeters is listed there. So I can go ahead and select 0.40. I'll say OK. That means any object that is on the A wall layer is going to, by default, have 0.40 millimeter thickness to it. So it's an easy way of setting that up. Now, I should also mention now, as we're starting to do this, that depending on which firm you work for, they have different conventions for how they do line weights. For our purposes, I'm going to do it in a visual sense, where we're going to set it at 0.4, and then everything's going to be 0.4. Some firms still do line weights based on color. And I like to at least tell you about this, so if you go to work for a firm that does line weights by color, you're aware that this is a typical practice that some firms do. And so they might have green lines are always going to plot at 0.40 millimeters. And red lines are always going to plot at 0.01 millimeters or whatever. And they have it set up that way. And if you're working in that kind of a firm, you get used to just seeing the colors and knowing that they translate to certain thicknesses of lines. It's a very old school way of doing line weights, because in the old days, plotters weren't actually printers. They weren't giant printers. They were a big, wide format with the same paper in it, but they had a little rack that had pens in it. Or I've actually seen it done with pencils, where it had pencils in it. And the plotter would actually pick up a pen, go over to the paper, and draw on the piece of paper, as opposed to doing an inkjet pass where it just drops little drops of ink. So that pen was assigned to a particular color. So you would draw in green on AutoCAD, and then the plotter would know, oh, OK, it's green. Let me go get the pen that's assigned to the green color. And even though it was a black pen, it was assigned to green on the plotter, and that would pick up, and then it would draw the old school drawing. We've modified that. Technology's gotten a lot better, so we don't really need to worry about it. So for me and for you guys, I think it's a lot easier to see this as a what you see is what you get. So we have a line thickness of 0.40. It's going to come out at 0.40. We don't have to worry about translating colors or whatever. So I'd just like to tell you that, though, because depending on who you work for, you may encounter this, and that could be problematic if you're not aware that this kind of a thing exists. So I've created the A wall layer. I'm going to go ahead and create a few more layers. I'll click on the New Layer button again, and I'll type A door right there. Now, on the A door layer, if I go back and reference my line weights here, I'm saying that a door should be 0.18 millimeters and black. So right over here, I'm going to change that to 0.18 millimeters. And there it is. We'll go ahead and create another here, and this is a window. And the window layer, we'll do it at 0.00. And 0.00 is not actually nothing. It's just the thinnest line that it can plot. So we'll do it at 0.00. There it is. So I have an A wall, an A door, an A window. And then there may be some others that I end up creating. And I'll stop there, and then I'll come back and create more when necessary. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close the Layer Properties Manager window. We have the option of compressing it into this little line. You could also dock it to one side if you wanted. For me, I tend to just close it and then open it again when I need it. So now it's a matter of taking the objects that I've created, so say the walls, for example, and moving them onto the A wall layer. If I were to select a wall, so let's say I select this piece of a wall, if we look up at the layers part of the home ribbon, you can see that it's currently on layer 0. So I want to change it from layer 0 to the wall layer. And in order to do that, I need to select it and then come up to the layers. And from this drop-down menu, I'll switch to A wall. Now these objects are on the A wall layer. And so you guys are all super smart, and you'd say, well, wait a minute, but you assigned a line weight to those, and it's not showing up. Well, you're right. It's not showing up because I haven't turned line weights on to view. So we're going to turn those on so that we can confirm that it's working. I'm going to come down here to the very bottom right corner under Customization, and I need to turn on the button for line weight. So I'll check the button for line weight. Once that line weight button shows up, it's right here. So I can minimize the Customize window, and then I can turn on the line weights. And when that happens, you can see that it then makes my wall thick. Unfortunately, AutoCAD doesn't display line weights below about 0.3 or 0.25 in its view. So if you have a thinner line, it's just going to appear as a line. When it goes to print, however, it will show up. So the thick lines are going to show, but the thinner lines aren't going to show. There is a place where you can change the scale of how the line weights appear. It's just too much work. So just know that they're assigned correctly. It's going to happen when we go ahead and print. So I need to change the rest of my walls onto that A wall layer. So I'm going to start working through and selecting the pieces. And it's going to be a combination of selecting from left and selecting from the right, depending on what it is I'm trying to select. And so I'm going to work my way around. You know, it's interesting. As you become more and more comfortable in AutoCAD, you will naturally start to make your selections from right to left and left to right without even thinking, oh, I need to include or I don't need to include. It's just an obvious brain switch. So you'll get more and more comfortable with that. Sometimes you make a mistake. If you want to deselect something, you can hold down the Shift key, and that'll deselect it. I have to work my way around. If you feel like you've gotten a little bit lost, you can always take the lines that you have selected, convert them over, deselect, and take a look at what you've missed. Sometimes that's a good advantage here. missed that. And this post right here. All right, we'll put all of that on the wall layer. Okay, so now all of my walls are on the wall layer, which is the way that I wanted it to. Notice I did select on a window the sides of the window. So the window sides are going to be on the wall layer because we want to delineate that we've cut through that. But the window itself, or the glass of the window, is going to be on the windows layer. So all of those walls are on the appropriate layer. If I wanted to confirm or double check that what's on the walls layer, I could also turn off the walls layer. So I could come over here and I could turn off the walls layer. And we can see that, okay, that's all that's left. That also makes things easier to select. So I could say, oh, those are all windows. Those are windows. Those are windows. Those are windows. Those are windows. And those are windows. And so all of those can go down to the window layer. And I could then turn off the window layer and say, okay, well, all my windows have been selected. Then I could go through and select the doors. So there's a door, there's two doors, there's some closet doors, there's some more closet doors. These are some sliding doors. And all of those could go on the doors layer. There we go. And I could turn that doors layer off. And so now I'm getting down to other pieces of my drawing. Let me go ahead and turn back on my walls so we can take a look at the walls there. I missed these walls. These should have been on the walls layer. All right. So I have stuff like this kitchen, the kitchen counter, the kitchen sink, and whatever. That needs to go on some kind of a layer. So here's my opportunity to create another layer. So I'll go back to the layer properties. I'm going to click on the new layer button. And this would be I think fixtures makes most sense, but some people like finishes. So I'm going to say A fixtures. And it's probably going to be fairly thin. Let me see what I have listed on the, yep, 0.9, 0.18, something like that. We'll go with it. And I'll take all of those and put that on the fixtures. This edge here is the end of a patio. It's not a wall, it's the end of a patio. That's kind of a tricky one as to where it really belongs. I may just leave it on the layer 0, but I could also put it on some other layer, like a patio layer or something. These lines here are little thresholds, so they're just extra little details. So we'll leave those off as well. These are overhangs, so they're roof overhangs. So that could go on an A-roof layer, for example. So I can go back to layer properties, create another one here. This would A roof. Change the line weight to 0, 0. And I could then put these on the A roof layer, like that. So there's a few mistakes, like I didn't finish the upper cabinets here or the upper cabinets there. But at this point, I've assigned the bulk of my drawing to specific layers. And that makes it easy to assign line weights and to start to see this as a floor plan. OK, so at this point, we need to start thinking about how do you enhance the drawing a little bit more? How do we show what's going on in a particular room? And so there's in floor plans, there's typically two ways of explaining what happens in a particular room. And it depends a lot on the scale where you go to print it on the wall, or how big you want to show it to somebody, or how technical the drawing is. One way is to put text in and say, this is kitchen. So you have an empty room, and you write kitchen. Or you have an empty bathroom. This here is the bathroom. I could write bath in it, and that would designate this as bathroom. The other way, and the way that frequently professors will encourage you to do it in architecture school, is to actually draw in the stuff that goes in there. So you don't label it, you just draw in, oh, it's a bathroom, so it needs a toilet and it needs a sink, and you would draw that in. If it's a bedroom, you draw in a bed symbol. When we're doing those, they're repetitive. So if we have a bed, we typically are going to put a bed in frequently if it's a bedroom. Or a toilet, for example. We can use a toilet over and over again. And so if it's an object that we're going to use over and over again, oftentimes it can be used as a block reference. And so this is a key concept that's set up in AutoCAD, and that is that you can have a file that sits on your flash drive or on your hard drive that has things that you want to just drop into your AutoCAD drawing. You don't have to draw them over and over again, you just drop them in. And so we'll do that using blocks. And there are some blocks that are built into AutoCAD. They're really convoluted to get to. If you have AutoCAD installed on your own computer, chances are it will jump right to where it's stored the blocks. These computers, for whatever reason, when they install them, you have to go find it, and it's too much work. So instead, there are a bunch of online sources for blocks. The one that I'm going to recommend that we visit is a website called First in Architecture. There's a link to it in the exercise page. And this First in Architecture, they have a whole section on CAD blocks. Some of their blocks they sell. There are a large number of them that are free. I'm not asking you to buy anything. You can get most of what you want out of the free blocks that they have. Now, some of the stuff isn't particularly relevant. Like, we don't need the sizes of a basketball court, or we don't need that for our house. But there are other things that might be relevant. This is another one. The coffee kettles is not probably the most relevant set of. But this one, bed and mattress sizes, okay, that might be relevant. So if we click on that, it will take us to the block that has the beds and mattress sizes in it. Down here at the bottom, there's a Download Now button. And that will then download it as a zip file. There's other ones that they've created. If we go in here under CAD Blocks, let's see here. Let's go to Furniture. There's tables, for example. Here are chairs. There are sofas. Here are other beds and wardrobes. These ones have a little bit more style to them, so you might be interested. So sometimes it takes a while to kind of go through and find the pieces that you're looking for. There we go. If it's presenting you metric or imperial, we're working in feet and inches, so it'll be imperial. You can download that. So all of these will come down as a zip file. If I look in my downloads folder, there are my zip files. I want to extract those before I can use them. So let me right click and say extract all. I can take this one, right click, and extract all. And there we go. And those files right there are just an AutoCAD DWG file, just like the one you created. Once you find that file, I like to copy them over into my flash drive so that I know where they are, so that I can use them again and again. Inside of my flash drive, I have a folder called Resources. Inside of that, I have a folder called AutoCAD. Inside of that, I have a folder called Blocks. And guess what? These are where all of those end up falling. And it keeps them in a place where I can go back and use them more. I have blocks that I've created that I end up using over and over, and I store those there as well. So they're all here, and you can actually see there's the CAD Blocks furniture. Let me go ahead and paste in the, oh, that is the furniture one. Let me get the bed one. Hold on. The mattress size. This is a new one for me. I haven't used this one before, so we'll see how it comes in just a second. Let me go ahead and paste that one in, and there we go. So once I have those stored on my flash drive, I can come back to my AutoCAD file, and now it's time to bring them in. And to do that, I'm going to switch out of the Home ribbon, and I'm going to go to the next one over, which is Insert. And right here in the Insert, there's an Insert block. It's in the first button. And if I click on Insert block, it's going to ask me where is the file that I want to bring in. I need to go and browse for it, so I'll click on the Browse button here. I'll go to my flash drive. And once again, in my resources folder, there it is. And it was the mattress and bed sizes was the one that I pulled up. And I can go ahead and say open. So it's finding the file, and then I have some options. Insertion point, I want to specify on the screen. I want to tell it where I want it to go. Scale, hopefully it's scaled correctly. When you're downloading blocks from the internet, sometimes they're done correctly because somebody drew them at some point. Sometimes they're not at the right scale. I don't know for sure, depending on which one you pick. The first in architecture ones all seem good. In the past, I've always had good luck with them. So scale, I'm going to leave it at 1, 1, and 1. Rotation, I'm not going to rotate it at all. And we'll go ahead and say OK. Now, when it comes in, it's going to insert as this big chunky thing, like that. This is not that usable. But if I go ahead, and I know this is a little strange, if I go ahead and delete it, and then I come back up to this insert button, all of the pieces are going to be preloaded in for me. So I can come in and I can say, OK, I want a king bed. And now the king bed is available for me to use. So if the king bed's going to go in this, I can drop it there. Notice that the line weights are really fat. That's because my current layer is the wall layer. So I probably don't want it on the wall layer. I probably want a layer called furniture. So I'll do a-furniture, or just fern. I'll change my line weight to be thin. And then I'll change that bed to be on the furniture layer. There it is. Let me also go ahead and make the furniture layer current. If I click on Layer Properties, double-click on Furniture, it'll be the current layer, so that when I bring other things in. So I could take this bed, and I could rotate it. And click the Rotate button. And I can rotate it. Then I can move it to be over on that wall. Maybe it needs to go down just a little bit more. We can move it like that. And you can see that I'm starting to populate what's going in this particular building. Maybe it's time to bring in some of the couches and stuff. I could go back to my insert. I could click on the insert button here. And it's not there anymore. So I'm going to click on More Options. And that's going to let me go and find some more. So we'll come in here and let's see. There's the furniture. There's the couches and stuff. We'll go ahead and say Open. Same thing applies. I'm going to drop it in. And then I'll go ahead and click on it and delete it. And then I can come back. And it'll be preloaded into my file here. So here's different sofa, arrangement 3, arrangement 2, depending on what it is. There's my sofa and my 2 chairs. And I can drop them in. Does that kind of make sense? So it's saving you a bunch of work because you can actually drop in something that either you've drawn ahead of time or somebody else has drawn. Brooke, you had a question.
Is there a difference between putting something on a layer from the drop down and you're doing the layers and then putting it on the property layer?
No, if you have the properties window, I haven't opened the properties window yet. If you change the layer in the properties window, it's exactly the same. Yep. It'll do the exact same thing. We will come to the properties menu. I think in 2 classes I'll start talking about the properties menu. But if you feel more comfortable changing the layer in the properties window, that's perfectly fine. So I've gone ahead and I've put those pieces in, and they're on their own layer, so that's good. I would continue. I would go find more blocks. I'd bring them in. Sometimes you like them. Sometimes you don't like them. Be aware that it takes time. The other thing that can happen, let me go ahead and let me see if I can insert another one here for a second, is some blocks have options. Let's see. I think it's this one that I made that has an option in it. All right. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Here it is. Come on. OK, so this block here is one that I made that has a bed that's a little bit more casually drawn. And if I click on it, there's a little triangle next to it. This one actually has several different sizes built into it. And so because of that little triangle, I can change oh, I want a king bed instead, or I want a double bed, and it'll just change right there on the fly, or I want a twin bed. Sometimes people who write blocks do this kind of work. It's more work initially, but if you use it, in this case, this is the one that I use for beds, it's a lot faster to have them all built into the same block. You can flip between sizes and throw them into any plan. So I just wanted to point that out. If you see that little symbol, that little triangle, that's usually a sign that there's different styles of beds available for you underneath, or styles of whatever it is. Okay? So it's just another little option there that's built in. Okay, so I've done that. I've brought in my blocks. Now, under part 3, this is an optional part of this, and I like to introduce you to it as a concept, but it may or may not be relevant. It may or may not work for you, which is why it's optional. It depends a lot on the blocks that you've inserted as to whether it will work or not work. And that is that you can use the hatches to put in some flooring or some texture on a particular piece of your drawing. We could also do this afterward in Illustrator during the collage phase. So it's a little bit flexible, but let me go ahead and show it to you here. So I'm going to initiate this by using the hatch command, and I forget it's right here. It actually looks a lot like the crop tool in Photoshop. And so I can type in hatch, and when I click on that hatch, it says pick internal point, or you can select objects. And what it means by picking internal point is picking something that's completely contained. So something like this, or something like the inside of a wall, like that, for example. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to pick, I'd like to pick the inside of this patio. There it is. And I've clicked it, and I'm filling it in. Now right now it's showing up as a solid color, a solid white. But I can change up here what the pattern is. And actually, if I were to zoom in far enough, it's not going to show it to me. It looks solid, but it's a series of diagonal lines. I can click on solid, or I can pick any one of a number of different patterns. So I could use, say, bricks. And there you go, you can see the bricks. Different size bricks. Depending on what it is that you're trying to do, you could pick any one of these pieces. You can also, some manufacturers, let's say you wanted to put pavers in, you can actually go to Bellegarde and download hatches that represent their particular pavers, and you can load them in, etc. So you can see that there's a variety of examples in here, some of which are more relevant than others for what it is that you're trying to do. Some of these are symbolic of things. So earth, for example, is symbolic in a section of what a particular material is. Concrete, same thing. You wouldn't say, oh, this is a concrete patio, so let me pick the concrete texture, because it's not meant to be used that way. The concrete symbol here is meant to be for a cut through, where you're saying this is a particular material. So anyway, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to change it to one of these brick patterns. But I also have the ability to adjust the scale of this. So I have the pattern selected here, but if I come over here to the scale, I can change how large these bricks are, for example. So it's at 1. If I bumped it up to 2, they would get a lot larger. So maybe I wanted this exterior patio to have kind of big tiles, in which case I could change that pattern. If I wanted to go back to the diagonals here, I might need to dramatically change the scale. So maybe I'd go to 10. Okay, well, we're starting to see the diagonal lines, but maybe it needs to be a little bit more. Maybe it's 20. Okay, it's starting to look more to the right scale. Let's go to 25. And you know what? I don't like the 45-degree angle, so let me change the angle so that they're all running in a particular direction. So I can change the angle here. I could say -45 if I wanted it to go horizontally. And this could end up looking a lot like flooring, for example. And so maybe I really wanted to apply that to the inside space rather than the outside space. So I could come in here and I could say, okay, well, all of the interior space is going to be filled with that flooring. Notice that you want to put the blocks in first. The other thing that happens is, like my kitchen counters here, I didn't finish off the counter, so it's filled in where the counter is. So you have to kind of have your drawing ready before you do the hatch part of this. But that can be a great way of assigning a flooring material to your building. In some cases, you don't want the hatch to go past a door boundary. In that case, you would need to draw in, I'm going to delete this to clarify it a little bit. You would want to draw in a little bit of a threshold. So I could draw in a line here, and I'll show you how to make that a non-printing line in just a second. But I could then fill in this with just the exterior hatch. So I could come in here and say, okay, I want this to be the brick again. We'll fill that in. My angle is going to be at 0. My scale was going to be at 2. And there it is for the exterior patio. Oh, I wanted to fill it in there too. Let me go back to hatch, and I'll fill it in right there. And now it's showing just this outside. Then I could switch to the other one. I could go back to, it's going to bug me that it's going to go inside the cabinet. So let me go back and add my hatch here. This was going to be my parallel lines, so we'll come up here to that. My scale was at 25. My angle was at -45. And then I'll fill in all of the floor that's inside of my building. So I've designated what's inside versus what's outside. Now, this would end up being really dark when it printed, so I also recommend changing the color of this hatch. It's very difficult for you guys to see on the projector here, but there's actually a hatch in here where you can see the floor, and I tell you that, let me see where it is, flooring, hatch, 0.00, and the C251 is referring to a color of 251. And so let me create a layer for the hatches. So I'll go back to my layer properties. I'm going to create a layer. This will be called A-hatch. I could also call it A-flooring or whatever. And then as I come over here where the color was white before, I'm going to click on the color and I'm going to change it to the color gray 251. So as I hover over here, you can see index color of 251. There it is. It's kind of a dark gray. This typically plots much lighter than it actually appears here. And my thickness was already 0, 0. So now all I have to do is select my hatches. I'll go back to the home ribbon and change those to be on the hatch layer. And they get much lighter, and it's a little bit easier to see that they go into the background instead. So this is just something that you can do, but you don't have to do it. The other option would be to use the hatch tool and the solid to fill in the walls. And so I could fill in, oops, you have to be careful, make sure you're inside the walls, but I could fill in all of the walls so that I read those as solid. We're going to do this in Illustrator after the fact, and I'll show you how to do it. Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it works nicely. It depends on the scale of your drawing and how small this floor plan is versus how large it is. If the floor plan is large enough, it's better to have thick lines. If the floor plan is going to be really small, it's better to have the walls actually filled in so you can read it a little bit better. So anyway, those are different options. I'm not going to finish doing that, but I wanted to present that as an option for you as well. Okay, so that gets us through part 3. Part 4, we've already pretty much assigned line weights, which is good, but I wanted to mention one other thing about line weights, and that is that you can always override what is the default line weight for something. So I could take a line, so let's say it's this one. That line there is on the wall layer, and it already has a particular line weight assigned to it, the 0.40 millimeters. If I wanted to change this, I could come up to my properties section right here, and I could say instead of being by layer, my line weight, I want to override it and make it thicker. So even though this line is on the wall layer, the thickness of it has been overridden manually. So it's important to know that you can always override what's on a layer. The layer is just the default. So if it's on that layer, it's going to have a particular line weight unless you specify otherwise. So let me go back. I don't want it to be overridden. I'm going to go back to by layer, and it's going to stay there and be based on the layer. The nice thing about that is if we've decided after the fact that, you know what, my line weights are a little bit too heavy and I wanted to change them, we can go right back to the layer properties. We can take the wall layer, and we can say, you know what, instead of 0.40, I wanted those to be a little bit thicker. Let's make them all 0.70, and then all the line weights change. So that's the advantage of doing it by layer. 0.70 would be a little bit too thick, though, for lines. So I'm going to go back to my 0.4. OK? When we're done, you're going to post your work. This one, it is important, rather than doing a screenshot, I want you to actually print a JPEG. I have a tutorial written out. It's AutoCAD 9.6, published to Web JPEG, that will walk you through step by step if you haven't picked up on it thus far. But I'm going to do it live for you here as well. I'm going to click the plotter icon, or the little printer icon. I'm going to change the printer or plotter name to be at the very bottom here, published to Web JPEG. I'll use the default paper size. Under the plot area, what to plot, I'm not going to plot the display. I'm going to plot a window. And then I will draw a box around my floor plan. I like to center the plot because at least it shows up in the center of the print. And under plot scale here, this is going to be dependent on whether you want it to fit in the piece of paper or whatever, or you could actually uncheck this and specify a particular scale to plot at. I'm just going to go ahead and fit to paper because scale doesn't matter at this point. Now, you've done all of this thus far, but we haven't adjusted the column over here on the right. If for some reason that column's not showing, there's a little sideways arrow that you can click on that will show this. We've assigned line weights, so we need to change the plot style table. We're going to change from none to the first option here, which is acad.ctb, the AutoCAD. That's the default. Assign this to all layouts. Yes, please do it. Then we have viewport options. Quality, I tend to put on maximum, though I don't think it matters much. Our plot options, all of these by default should be fine. We do want to make sure that plot object line weights is checked, because obviously we want to plot our line weights. And the rest of these are all fine. I'll go ahead and say OK. When I do that, it's going to ask me where I want it to save. So I'll make sure I put that on my flash drive into today's folder. And then I'll go ahead and click on Save. And it will create that floor plan for me. If I went to my flash drive and I looked for that, hold on one second here. There it is. Of course, Microsoft Paint is the default option because that makes sense. Let me go ahead and open this up in Photoshop so we can see it a little bit better. There it is. And so you can see here, this one turns out a little bit better. You can see really easily that it's reading as a floor plan. I've got appropriate line weights, starting to feel like it belongs. There's a few errors that I still need to fix, but OK, we're on the right track. This topography line runs right through my building. I probably need to trim that out. So I would go back here. I'll take this line there and this line there and my topography line. Oh, I have to make sure that it is not locked. So let me unlock my topography. There it is. All right, and I'll type trim. And then I'll go ahead and trim off that piece of topography. And then I can print again, and that topography no longer goes through my building. So you can go ahead and trim that where it goes through your building. And there we have it. So at the end today, I'm looking for a JPEG that has line weights. I'm looking for something with some blocks in it, some pieces of furniture in it. A fairly well-developed plan at this point. Next class, we're going to keep working with the same file, and we're going to draw the building's elevations. So what it looks like from the front, from the sides, and from the back. And I'll walk you through that process. I'll also spend a little bit more time talking about line weights and why line weights are important, and I'll show you a bunch of examples of elevations so that you can get your mind around what we're trying to draw. Okay? Are there any questions No, I'll let you keep working.